Karen, my neighbor, had always been a bit peculiar, but I never expected her to accuse me of stealing her water. It all started on a sunny Tuesday morning when I was watering my garden. Karen stormed over, her face red with anger, and demanded to know why my water usage had spiked. She claimed her water bill had doubled in the past month and insisted I was somehow siphoning water from her supply. I was stunned. I tried to explain that I had been watering my plants more frequently due to the heat wave, but she wouldn't listen. Her voice grew louder, attracting the attention of other neighbors, who peeked out of their windows to see what the commotion was about. Karen accused me of being irresponsible and selfish, claiming I was draining the neighborhood's resources. I felt humiliated and frustrated, but I kept my cool, promising to look into the matter. That evening, I checked my water meter and found nothing unusual. My usage was consistent with previous months, and there were no signs of leaks or malfunctions. The next day, I approached Karen to share my findings, but she dismissed them outright. She insisted I was lying and threatened to report me to the Homeowners Association. I decided to take matters into my own hands and investigate further. I contacted a plumber to inspect my property, but he found no issues. Meanwhile, Karen's accusations grew more frequent and public. She began posting about the situation on the neighborhood Facebook group, painting me as the villain. The comments were divided. Some neighbors sided with her, while others urged her to consider alternative explanations. I felt isolated and stressed, unsure of how to clear my name. One afternoon, as I was walking my dog, I noticed a small puddle near Karen's driveway. It hadn't rained in days, so I found it odd. I mentioned it to her, but she brushed it off, saying it was probably from her sprinklers. A few days later, the puddle had grown into a small pool, and I could hear the faint sound of running water. I knocked on Karen's door to alert her, but she wasn't home. Concerned, I left a note and decided to call a mutual friend, Linda, who lived down the street. Linda suggested we contact the water company to investigate. Reluctantly, Karen agreed, and a technician was scheduled to visit the following week. As the days passed, the tension between Karen and me grew unbearable. She avoided eye contact and stopped greeting me altogether. I felt like a pariah in my own neighborhood, all because of a misunderstanding I couldn't seem to resolve. The night before the technician's visit, I lay awake, wondering if this ordeal would ever end. Little did I know, the truth was about to come to light in the most unexpected way. The repair crew worked tirelessly over the next few days to fix the corroded pipe in Karen's yard. The sound of machinery and the sight of dirt being hauled away became a constant backdrop to the neighborhood. Karen kept to herself, avoiding eye contact with me and the other neighbors. I could tell she was embarrassed by the whole situation, but I didn't press her. I figured she needed time to process everything. Meanwhile, the neighborhood gossip began to shift. People who had once sided with Karen now whispered about how she had been so quick to blame me without evidence. Others praised me for handling the situation with grace, though I didn't feel particularly graceful. I just wanted things to go back to normal. One afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, Karen approached me hesitantly. She looked different, softer. Somehow, her usual sharp demeanor was replaced by a quiet vulnerability. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice tentative. I nodded and set down my gardening tools. Of course. We sat on my porch, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. Karen took a deep breath before speaking. "I owe you a proper apology," she began. "I was wrong to accuse you like that. I let my frustration get the best of me, and I took it out on you. I'm sorry." Her words were sincere, and I could tell it wasn't easy for her to say them. "Thank you," I replied. "I appreciate that. It's been a tough few weeks for both of us." Karen nodded, her eyes downcast. I don't know how to make this right. I feel like I ruined everything." I reached out and placed a hand on her arm. "You haven't ruined everything. We're neighbors, and neighbors look out for each other. Let's just move forward from here." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're being so kind about this. I don't deserve it." "Everyone makes mistakes," I said gently. "What matters is how we handle them afterward." Karen smiled faintly, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll do better. I promise." Over the next few days, Karen made an effort to be more neighborly. She brought over a basket of fresh-baked cookies as a peace offering, and we chatted for a while on my porch. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. The tension between us began to ease, and I felt hopeful that we could rebuild our relationship. However, just as things were starting to settle down, an unexpected twist emerged. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, I noticed a small puddle forming near my own driveway. My heart sank as I realized what it might mean. I crouched down and touched the water. It was cold and clear, just like the puddle in Karen's yard had been. I felt a knot of dread form in my stomach. Could there be a leak on my property too? The next morning, I called the water company and explained the situation. Greg, the same technician who had inspected Karen's property, arrived later that day. He conducted a thorough inspection and confirmed my fears. There was indeed a small leak in one of the pipes leading to my house. It wasn't as severe as Karen's had been, but it needed to be fixed as soon as possible. Everything Karen and I had been through. It turned out that both of our properties had been affected by the same issue. I decided to tell Karen about it, partly to share the news and partly to see how she would react. When I knocked on her door, she opened it with a smile. "Hey, what's up?" she asked. "I have some news," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Turns out I have a leak too." Karen's eyes widened in surprise. "You're kidding. Are you serious?" I nodded. "Greg's working on it right now. It's not as bad as yours was, but it's still a pain." Karen shook her head, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Well, isn't that something? I guess we're in the same boat after all." "Seems like it," I replied, laughing softly. Maybe the universe has a weird sense of humor. Karen's smile widened, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine connection with her. "You know," she said, "maybe this is a sign that we're supposed to stick together. You know, like a neighborhood support group for leak victims." I chuckled. I liked the sound of that. We could start a club. We spent the next hour chatting and laughing, the tension between us melting away. It felt good to finally put the past behind us and focus on moving forward. By the time I left Karen's house, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The ordeal had been stressful, but it had also brought us closer together in an unexpected way. As the days turned into weeks, Karen and I continued to rebuild our relationship. We started a neighborhood watch program together and even organized a block party to bring everyone closer. The leak incident became a running joke between us, a reminder how far we'd come. And while things weren't perfect, they were better, much better. Looking back, I realized that the whole experience had taught me an important lesson about patience, understanding, and the power of forgiveness. Karen and I had started off as adversaries, but through honesty and compassion, we had become friends. It wasn't the ending I had expected, but it was the one I needed. And as I sat on my porch, watching the sunset and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey we had taken together. The morning of the water technician's visit dawned bright and clear, but my mood was anything but sunny. I had barely slept the night before, tossing and turning as I replayed Karen's accusations in my mind. Her words had stung more than I cared to admit, and the thought of being labeled a thief in my own neighborhood was unbearable. I kept telling myself that the truth would come out eventually, but the waiting was agonizing. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching for the technician's arrival. Karen had agreed to meet him at her house, but she had made it abundantly clear that she didn't want me involved. I respected her wishes, though it pained me to stay on the sidelines while my reputation hung in the balance. Around 9 a.m., a white van with the water company's logo pulled into Karen's driveway. A middle-aged man in a blue uniform stepped out, carrying a toolbox and a clipboard. I assumed this was Greg, the technician Karen had mentioned. He looked friendly enough, with a salt and pepper beard and a no-nonsense demeanor. Karen greeted him at the door, her arms crossed and her expression tense. She pointed toward the puddle near her driveway, and Greg nodded, crouching down to examine it. I watched from my window, my heart pounding as he began his inspection. He spent nearly 2 hours combing through Karen's property, checking the water meter inspecting the pipes and examining the outdoor fixtures. At one point, he pulled out a small device that looked like a metal detector and began scanning the ground. My curiosity was piqued. What was he looking for? As the minutes ticked by, I found myself growing more anxious. What if Greg didn't find anything? What if Karen's accusation stuck, and I was forever branded as the neighbor who stole water? I tried to distract myself by tidying up the house, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the scene unfolding next door. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my dog's leash and decided to take him for a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. As I passed Karen's house, I noticed Greg crouching near the puddle again, his brow furrowed in concentration. Karen stood a few feet away, her arms still crossed and her foot tapping impatiently. I quickened my pace, not wanting to intrude, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. When I returned from my walk, Greg was packing up his tools and speaking to Karen in a low voice. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but her face turned pale, and she shook her head in disbelief. Moments later, Greg got into his van and drove off, leaving Karen standing in her driveway, staring at the ground. My heart raced. What had he told her? Was this the breakthrough I had been hoping for? I hesitated for a moment, then decided to approach her. As I walked over, she looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and confusion. What did he say? I asked cautiously, trying to keep my tone neutral. Karen hesitated before responding, her voice tight. He thinks there might be a leak underground, but he's not sure. He said they'll need to do more tests. I nodded, trying to hide my relief. This was the first sign that the issue might not be my fault after all. Well, that's good, right? At least they're taking it seriously. Karen shot me a sharp look. Good? Do you have any idea how much it's going to cost to dig up my yard? And what if they don't find anything? Then what? I bit my tongue, not wanting to escalate the situation. I'm sure they'll figure it out, I said gently. And if there's a leak, it's better to fix it now before it gets worse. Karen didn't respond. She just turned on her heel and marched back into her house, slamming the door behind her. I sighed and returned to my own home, feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved that the investigation was moving forward. On the other hand, Karen's hostility was wearing me down. I had always tried to be a good neighbor, but this ordeal was testing my patience. Over the next few days, the water company conducted further tests on Karen's property. They brought in a team of workers who dug up sections of her yard to inspect the pipes. The process was messy and disruptive, and Karen grew increasingly frustrated. She blamed me for the inconvenience, even though I had nothing to do with the investigation. If you had made such a big deal about this, none of this would be happening, she snapped one afternoon when I tried to offer my support. I bit back a retort and walked away, reminding myself that the truth would come out eventually. Meanwhile, the neighborhood gossip intensified. Some neighbors sympathized with Karen, while others began to question her accusations against me. Linda, our mutual friend, tried to mediate, but Karen refused to listen. She was convinced I was behind her water woes, even as evidence pointed to a different cause. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, I overheard Karen arguing with her husband, Tom, in their backyard. I don't care what the tests say. She's still responsible, Karen shouted, her voice carrying through the quiet evening air. Tom tried to calm her down, his tone measured. Karen, you need to let this go. The evidence is clear. There's a leak, and it's not her fault. You're taking her side now? Karen shot back, her voice rising. After everything she's put us through, I felt a pang of guilt, even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I quickly finished taking out the trash and retreated inside, not wanting to eavesdrop any further. The tension between Karen and me was palpable, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The next morning, Greg returned with a team to finalize their investigation. They dug deeper into Karen's yard, uncovering a section of corroded pipe that was leaking water into the soil. Greg explained that the leak had likely been there for months, slowly worsening over time. Karen listened in stunned silence as he outlined the repairs needed to fix the problem. When Greg finished, Karen turned to me, her face a mixture of embarrassment and regret. I guess I owe you an apology, she muttered. her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, accepting her words but still feeling the weight of the past few weeks. "It's okay," I said softly. "I'm just glad we figured it out." Karen didn't respond. She just turned and walked back into her house, leaving me standing in her driveway. The tension between us began to ease, but the damage to our relationship had already been done. As the repair crew worked on fixing the leak, I couldn't help but wonder if things would ever go back to normal. The ordeal had taken a toll on both of us, and I wasn't sure how to move forward. Little did I know, the final chapter of this saga would bring an unexpected twist that would change everything.